Welcome to this Select Technology webinar titled PowerApps. My name is Jig Mehta. I'm the Select Technology Marketing Executive. You can see my details on the screen. Your presenter today is Nick Ellis, Digital Transformation Consultant. His details are there on the screen as well, and I'm going to hand you over to Nick now.
Thank you, Jig, and thank you everybody for joining. As Jig says, we've got about an hour. Before we start, I just want to go through what we're going to be going through and also, importantly, what we're not going to be going through. So the purpose of this is to talk about the possibilities of PowerApps and the kind of things that can be achieved fairly quickly and easily. It is not a training session. It's not an extensively technical session. It gets into some technical areas, but it's not a masterclass, if you will. So that's kind of the scope of what we're discussing today. It's all based on the idea of invoice approvals. Some of you may have been here for a webinar on Tuesday. If you were, we're kind of building on that process. Tuesday it was all how do we do it just using SharePoint and PowerAutomate. Today we're looking at taking that as a base and then building it up with PowerApps into a more kind of application feel rather than it all just being driven by email. So the first question is going to be, what is PowerApps? PowerApps is a low-code development platform, is what they call it. Microsoft sell it as being a platform that enables any business user to create their own applications based on Office 365 and connecting into other applications. I would say that's probably a bit ambitious. I understand why they're saying that, but I think you need to have some understanding of how software works. It's not like coming along and building an Excel spreadsheet. It's more complicated than that. It's not even like building an Access database. It's more complicated than that. You have to keep track of how things are moving around, and there are some kind of software best practices that it's a good idea to use. So I think anybody with an interest in the subject and ability to read fairly technical documentation and understand it, and to develop in those kind of ways probably can. You don't need to be a trained kind of graduate software developer, but I think the marketing around it that sort of suggests anybody in the business can pick it up and have an app this afternoon is probably a bit ambitious. So what they mean by low code is that they have packaged up into pre-built chunks of software most of the things that you're likely to need. So all of your kind of user experience, the deployment method, how the look and feel of it, how things interact, how data is moved from screen to screen. It's all very clearly defined for you. But you do still end up, and you'll see in a minute, you do still end up writing at the very least kind of Excel type formulas, but they are driving behavior rather than calculation. So when I press this button, do this, where in Excel it's going to add this to that and what have you. As I say, it's about creating apps principally on the Office 365, so you can build out with Word, SharePoint, Excel, Outlook, Planner. You can connect all these things together in a very particular way. So if you've got a specific experience in your business or a specific process in your business where you always need this Word document, that plan, this spreadsheet, whatever it might be, PowerApps is a really good way of presenting that all together, and you can actually pull the data from those plans. I'm saying that, I'm not sure you can pull data from plans, but you can pull it from spreadsheets, you can pull it from databases and what have you, and publish it into plans, certainly. All that kind of stuff is all there. So it is really good for specific processes, defined processes. We start here, we end there. and in between we do these 5 things. And we want to enable people to do that mobile or on a laptop in a coffee shop or all those kind of scenarios. What it's not good for, this is a personal opinion, and I imagine Microsoft's marketing department might say, oh, you know, you're being unfair. But my view, it's not great for building large, complex applications that are going to run your whole business. There are better ways of doing that. It's targeted applications. So I've done some that were freelance timesheets. We get freelancers in, they do an hour here, an hour there, and what have you. I need a way to just track their time. Really good for that. Very clear process. Start, finish, clear logons. We know who everyone is. It's fine. Invoice approval that we're going to talk about here. Very clear process. Start at the beginning, run to the end. 4 or 5 steps in between. Great. PowerApps is brilliant for that. If you're talking about a whole ERP system, I want to manage my whole supply chain. Probably not. So PowerApps doesn't have a great deal of logic of its own. It doesn't think a lot for itself. And if you want to do that, the way it enables that is it connects you through to PowerAutomate, which used to be known as Flow until the end of last year. So rather than building a whole engine of activity there, it throws a lot of the processing out to Flow to do that kind of hard work. So again, to develop PowerApps, it's really good if you know a bit about PowerAutomate. And I would suggest start with PowerAutomate, move to PowerApps, not the other way around. Because if you start with PowerApps, you're going to find it quite frustrating. Whereas if you start with PowerAutomate, it's much easier to pick up how to use PowerApps. Because it connects into PowerAutomate, we're using the same word power a lot here, but because it connects into PowerAutomate, that then gives it that link through into the outside world. So you can be doing things in PowerApps that have an outside product that leaves your business entirely, goes into something like Twitter or Facebook. You can do all that social media type stuff, or that is going into your finance system, or etc. etc. You get the idea that you're not constrained just to Office because you've got that connection through PowerAutomate, and PowerApps does have a number of connectors outside the Office world of its own as well. So what we're going to do here, we're going to have a quick walk through the process. We're going to talk about the development environment, what that looks like, how we connect to data to populate a Power App, and how we design forms, how we design a bit of logic to do the things we want it to do, and the linking into PowerAutomate for that logic, and then the publishing and sharing. So the user experience, I'm going to kind of do publishing and sharing as the slices of a sandwich, the bookends of a shelf. That's probably what I meant to say. The user experience is either web, so you can build the app, publish it, it will appear in a browser, you can send people a link, or there is a PowerApps client in the Windows Store in Windows 10, which, so you download the PowerApps client, then you log on with your Microsoft Office 365 account. That will know which apps you've got permissions to access. We'll talk a little bit about permissions in a bit. There's also PowerApps clients for Android and for iOS, for Apple iPad and iPhone and what have you. So those are your basic user experiences: web, Windows, Android, Apple. Basically, there is not a PowerApps client for Apple Mac. Yeah, that's all. You've got to do that over the web. Right, that's the preamble done. Well done for surviving that long. What I'm going to do is I am going to share my screen, which is here. There we go. So what we're looking at here is the business process that I'm going to be using as an example. Now, this business process will be familiar to anybody that was here on Tuesday and saw that one, because I haven't changed it, I haven't done anything to it. I made a point on Tuesday of saying that the demo on Tuesday on PowerAutomate was based on something that I did not start writing until Monday. I put it together in a day. That was not to say, hey, look at me, how awesome I am. That was to say, it's possible to put this together in a day if you know what you're doing. The PowerApps that we're looking at today, I'm going to be completely honest with you, in the interest of transparency, I didn't think this one was going to be a PowerApps webinar today. I thought we were talking about office productivity tips. And then I looked at my calendar yesterday lunchtime and I went, oh, and I said some words I'm not going to repeat now. Tomorrow is a PowerApps one. I haven't prepared for that at all. So everything you're going to see today, again, has been put together in just over 24 hours, 7 of which I've been asleep, and some of them I've been, having dinner and watching a bit of TV and so on. So again, I'm deliberately not showing you a super advanced one. I'm showing you what can be done quickly and easily, and with the goal of sort of sparking your imagination of, well, if I can do that in a day, what can I do in a week? But this business process, so the idea simply is somebody in the finance department probably drops an invoice into a document library and starts a flow that requests some approval from somebody. They either approve or reject. If they approve, it then checks to see whether that person has sufficient authority to approve that invoice. So you might have somebody who's only got, say, £1,000 worth of spend authority. If you've got £2,000 invoice, okay, well, I've got approval from the first person, but now I need to go and get somebody else. And if they approve, then we do the same check again to see if we need to go up another layer until eventually either somebody has rejected it, in which case it's going to get updated to rejected and sent back, or approved, in which case it gets marked as approved. You could, as we were saying the other day, then build logic to integrate that into your finance system if you wanted to. So that's the business process we're talking about. I'm not going to come back to this unless people ask questions to that effect. So PowerApps, to do that, we built a few elements in SharePoint. So SharePoint is a very common starting point when you're developing PowerApps, because you can use SharePoint lists as the data sets. You don't need a database. You haven't got to suddenly learn SQL. You haven't got to be subscribing to online stuff to store your data. You can just use a SharePoint list as your data set if you want. So we've got a document library here, which essentially is the invoices, and that's got some extra fields of data in it here. And then I've created a few extra lists just to give us the right data to manage. So a list of potential vendors, people's spend authority. You can see you can also see this is a fictional tenant within the Microsoft world. This isn't Select Technologies data you're looking at, obviously, but I have created Jig myself, Simon, my director, and Nestor Wilk is a fictional character who's the MD of the business. And then I've also got a list here that basically describes what a few people in the business are. So I've listed Jig as not an admin, not a finance person, but he is an approver. I'm an admin, not a finance, and I am an approver. Simon is the same as Jig, but note with very different spend authorities. And then we've got Megan as being not an admin, not an approver, but she is in the finance team. So this is about getting into stuff like separation of duties. If you come across that, if you've got the scale of business to do it, it's a good idea that the person who's requesting approval for an invoice not be allowed to also approve an invoice. Just it improves the quality of your audit, makes it easier to track. So you can see all the data is actually in SharePoint. You can connect to other sources. You can connect to on-premise databases. You can connect to pretty much anything you want in PowerApps. But an easy way to start the development is to put it in SharePoint and then move into something bigger if you need to, would be my advice. Now you can go from here. There's a PowerApps drop down in every SharePoint list and every SharePoint document library as well. And you can, in the document library, it will give you customized forms, and that will allow you to create custom forms for managing documents in the library. It's sort of slightly circular sentence. It will always do this. I've done this deliberately, that if you start in SharePoint, it will always do this, which is, you can start to see in the background, it will format it for mobile. I don't know why, but it will always format it for mobile from there. And then these forms will also replace the standard information form that you get in SharePoint. Now I'm not going to use that, so I'm just going to come back, not save. It can be a bit difficult to get out of this screen sometimes. So I tend not to use these because it leads you down the path towards mobile. Again, if I take the permissions, for example, I can go create an app. I can give it a name, but unless Microsoft have changed something over the weekend, which they do sometimes, it will assume that I want a mobile app. It's not giving me, you notice, it's not giving me any choice about this. It's just going straight in, boom, and it has, you can maybe see behind there that it's rendering it as a mobile app for me. Really, really handy if you've got a SharePoint list. What it will do automatically straight out there is it will create a list like this, that with like a detail screen, plus to create a new record in the list, and I can press save on that now and publish it. File. Actually, it saved it itself when it finished deploying it. Hit share. I can share that with Jig now, and if Jig were to go to his mobile, not asking you to, Jig, just to be clear, but if Jig were to go to his mobile, he could download that app and start interacting with that SharePoint list in a sort of more mobile friendly, more intuitive way than the standard SharePoint experience. So that's one quick and easy way to just spin up and share. If you've literally got this list, I want everybody in my business to be able to fill in this list. There you go, done. As long as you also want everybody in the business to be able to read everything on that list, you can do that in a few seconds. This process we're talking about here today is obviously a bit more complex than that. So what I did there was I went into the development environment, and there we go, I don't know why I left there, and hit new. And you get various options when you do that, and you'll see here blank app, start with a blank canvas or a template. It's always worth exploring the templates. So there are a lot of template apps for PowerApps. This is showing me there are two different views on this screen. This is not the one with the templates that I wanted, but I'll come back and find it in a bit. But there are a lot of pre-built applications that you can use. They need a bit of modification normally because, of course, Microsoft can't predict everybody's exact business process. But there's lots of stuff for things like leave management, time management, expenses. There is an invoice approvals one already built. There's all sorts of, there's hundreds of them that you can just download and start using if you've got the right Office license. And I really recommend having a look at those if you get the opportunity. In the interest of time, I'm going to press on, but if I've got time at the end, I'll go back and find those. Tablet layout or phone layout. Well, tablet, I think it's slightly misleading. So it's because they're drawing you down a mobile experience all the time. But the tablet layout, if I hit that, you'll see It's this, which is also pretty much the right dimensions for it to be presented through the web as well. So it will work. Tablet layout will give you a nice big website type screen. What it's not dynamic. What I mean by that is it won't go, oh, I'm on a phone now, so I'm going to reflow. You'll end up, it doesn't really work. So if you're expecting it to be on a phone, you need to produce a phone version of the same thing, which it's a bit clunky, but I can see why. The reason is in order to keep it as low code as possible. If they were to say, well, we'll reflow it and make it fit whatever you're on, that gets into more complicated code, becomes more of a problem to support. If you'll excuse me 1 second, I'm just going to have a quick drink because my throat's dry. My apologies, sorry about that. So this is where I started, and you can see it will just give you a blank page, and it'll say, you know, what do you want? It's literally a blank sheet of paper to do what you want with, and the first thing that you're going to need is some data. Now by default it will give you these ones. I don't use them, to be honest, but it will give you them. More interesting to me is the various connectors. So these are the types of data that you can connect to easily from PowerApps, and you can see you've got some of the things that you might expect, import from Excel, but then you've got ACT, which is a CRM tool, the Adobe Creative Cloud, you can connect to directly from PowerApps, Adobe Sign for getting digital signatures, Amazon Redshift. So that, I mean, that one is a surprise to me, or was a surprise to me the first time I saw it, because that's a direct competitor to a Microsoft product, but they've opened it up. You know, you'll notice the Diamond does mean it's a premium license, but you know, we're going through here. We've only just about got into the Bs. There's a lot that you can connect to in here. Some of the more basic stuff like MailChimp for the SME market. MailChimp is very popular. You've got Asana, you've got all sorts of things. What we're using here is SharePoint. SharePoint. I don't want going up the alphabet. PQRS. SharePoint. That's obviously because I expanded the list. SharePoint is one of the pinned ones that even if you haven't expanded the list will show up at the top, so it's easier to find than that normally. When you click on SharePoint, the first thing it's going to do is throw up all the SharePoint sites that I have got access to because I'm the logged on user. I can't connect with data that I don't have permissions to for obvious reasons. So if you need your developers or whoever it is that's doing this to access it, you do need to make sure that they've got access to the data. Pick the site that your data's in, and then it's a nice intuitive. So okay, so which bits of data do we want? Well, we don't want that, but we do want that, and we want that, and we want that, and we want that. Go. And then you'll see over here, it's now added those into the application. What I'm going to do now, because that's the kind of the basic setup, I'm going to come out of that and into the invoice approval app that I've already built. Leave that and come to that. So this is the invoice approval app that I built. It's based on the same data set. Well, it's exactly the same data set that I've just showed you, which is only slightly modified from the app-free version that we talked about on Tuesday in the PowerAutomate one. Each app is made up of a set of screens. Commonly, you have a welcome screen like this. It's always a good idea to put the image, if you can, of the person who is logged on. You'll notice that happens. I mean, it's up here as well, the same image. That happens a lot in Microsoft environment, but it happens in most applications. There's a reason why they do that, and it's not vanity. it's because your eye will get caught if that picture is anybody other than you. So you'll hopefully realise that it's not you that's logged on. It's just to avoid things being done, well, and with the wrong identity, put it that way. So it's always a good idea to do that, and also to on menu pages I tend to put the name of the user, because again it's a good idea. What I was saying about the formulas, this phrase here, hello Nick Ellis, it says, that's like as you can see, a sort of an XLE type formula where it's a hello and a space and then goes and grabs the user. So we don't need to develop lots and lots of stuff the way we do. This is what I mean by low code. The logged on user, it's all part of Office 365. It knows who's logged on, so it's really easy to just go and grab that information. And in any situation, the full stop is your friend. Those of you who developed software in the past might recognize that. The full stop is your friend. If you hit a full stop, it will say, okay, what do you want? These are the attributes available for user that would make sense in this context. So we want full name, put that back, and it works. And this is kind of how it works with PowerApps generally, that you kind of put, in this case, that was a label. You put that in, and then you just set a few properties for it, and you can see all those properties down here. If you've ever used Microsoft Access, this will be fairly familiar to you, the way it works, but it's all drop-down lists. It's really difficult to do anything that will really break things. In fact, you can't do anything that will really break things. You can do things that don't work. You can do things that don't make any sense, but you can't do anything that will break PowerApps, which is obviously a good thing. Over the top, we've got the familiar kind of ribbon experience that Microsoft was so keen on. Home, insert, view, and action. I'm not going to go through all of these, but the insert is where most of the work happens. So we can add all sorts of different controls. Sliders, for example, I used a slider the other day for a risk assessment form, sliding the probability from 1 to 10, sliding the impact from 1 to 10. Ratings, you can insert forms from Microsoft Forms, etc, etc, etc. Gallery is for where you've got a scrolling list of records that you want people to interact with. A data table is a data table, and forms and media we're going to come on to. So, as I say, putting this together, first thing I thought was let's have a nice background. That's a image. Take an image object, and then it is just a case of coming to here and going upload a file. You get the Windows file upload. There's the image. Done. You've then got things like transparency, position, various other attributes of it that you can set to, I could choose to fill it when hovered over. That wouldn't make any sense, but I can do all sorts of different things, set the size, and so on. The transparency I like because what I do this quite commonly. I have it 0 transparency on the menu page, so it looks quite bold, but then keep it there, but set the transparency to 0.5, so 50%. Just fade that off a little bit in the other screens. The main reason for keeping it there is because it just makes it a slightly more engaging user experience. You don't have to. There's no mandate on any of this. The screens we've got here to execute the process are an approver screen, a list of all invoices, and a new invoice screen. So there are a few different ways of creating forms in PowerApps. The easiest is, not surprisingly, to use the form button. So what I'll do, I'll create a new, just duplicate this screen. Again, you can see how easy it is to you can see how easy it is to just drag and drop things in, duplicate screens and so on. But with forms, if I say I want an edit form or a display form, I've got two choices, edit or display. So new is a form of edit. So we're going to go, we want an edit form, and then up here, edit for what? So in here I've got the various, so maybe I want to edit approval thresholds. All I've got to do is select approval thresholds. It'll go and get all the fields and chuck it in. And it's then principally a design activity. And this is quite like working with PowerPoint, to be honest. Just to say, okay, I want it to be this size. You can choose how many columns you have in the form. So if I said it was 6 columns, it probably would decline to do it because it doesn't make any sense. But I could reduce it to 2 columns or even 1 column. But it's not going to go above 3 because it's doing some logic of its own to say, well, you've got 6 things. It doesn't make sense to have 4 columns. Again, I can do all sorts of, you can see this color stuff. I can choose to disable specific fields. That's a bad one to have selected. I can change the text mode, so I can say, well, that one I don't want. I want it to be multi-line, or I want it to be password. And as I was saying earlier, it's all kind of drag and drop, select the values. Where it gets more complicated is if you want to move away from what Microsoft have decided in advance is the sensible way to do things. So if we come on to, for example, the approver screen, what we have on the approver screen is a data table that shows everything which is assigned to the current user. Now, frustratingly, I haven't got anything assigned to me at the moment, so I'm just going to go and that's because it's not submitted. What I'll do is I'll quickly submit that one from here. Now, when you're working in the development environment for PowerApps, it doesn't update its data intuitively. That's not going to show straight away here. So what you have to do is come to here and refresh the data set. There you go. Obviously, when you're using it live, it constantly refreshes its data to make sure. But the reason it doesn't do that here is because there's quite a lot going on, and it just tries to keep the load down. So I can pick, sorry, I'll put it in play mode. I can pick that record, and if I go view original, he says, there you go, and it loads the file out so that I can inspect and view that original from here. To do that, I've had to give it this, and this is what I mean about where we're starting to deviate a little bit from the standard experience. So I have to tell it launch the file, but then I also have to tell it which file. It's not quite clever enough to go, well, you clicked on that row, so you must mean that one. So you have to start doing some of this. There is really, really good documentation, and I'm not given to saying that. Software documentation is often terrible, but there is really good documentation for PowerApps. Almost anything that you would want to do, you can come along and just give it a search. This gives you all of the syntax, exactly how to put it together. But this is what I mean about their claim that any business user can come along and build their apps. Yes, you can in terms of your licensing, and you can if you're willing to learn quite a lot of maybe more technical skills, but I would suggest you might need hand-holding to avoid making some mistakes if you're not familiar with kind of software disciplines. Also here with this table, I put in, but you'll see in the invoices there's more columns than are shown in that table. When I selected it, it put all of those columns in, and then I have to go edit fields and start selecting, okay, well, I do want this, I don't want that. I could have had any of these fields, you can see here. So you have to start getting into configuring what that means. let's just look at this again. So this is the approval table there. In that dot that I was saying, approval table dot selected. So the row that is selected in that table. Dot again, get me the ID. So what we're saying is get the link to the item from invoices for the item that has the same ID as I've just clicked in the table. That's what I mean. It's not just quite as straightforward as it seems. However, we can do all of that with default forms. That was actually a table with the new invoice. This is a default form. Again, just drop the form in, tell it what fields you want, and this one's a much simpler bit of code. You know, submit the form, fill it in, submit the form. The line that you might have seen, there's a line underneath there, which is navigate. So navigate is submit this form, then go back to the all invoices page, is all that says. So each line is fairly straightforward formulas. The other way to create forms, if you're feeling a bit more adventurous, I'll just duplicate this screen for now, is to let me just remove, there you go, like that. Remove this form. If you want to, you can build forms for yourself by dragging and dropping the kind of values that you might want. Checkboxes. You can see all the things that you can access here. Toggles. I'm going to put a slider on just because I like sliders. I just think they're cool. So you can see, you can set a value range and then pick up whatever number has been specified in the slider. The problem with that is you then have to write some quite complicated formulas to pick all that data up. You've got to tell it where it's going back to. You've got to tell it exactly this box is going to go in that column and this box is going to go in that column, and we're going to get the number off of that slider and put it in this column. It gives you more flexibility. It's very possible. It creates if you've got a custom kind of user experience that you're trying to achieve, this is the way to do it, but it's more time consuming. You can do that. This screen took me, I don't know, 3 or 4 minutes. If I were to build the same kind of screen but with custom forms like this, I'd probably be looking to put 20 minutes, half an hour in order to get it all correct, get everything lined up right, and get the code correct. So it's about time, it's about confidence, and it's about need. If you only need a simple form, it's very, very quick and easy. Other things we've got up here are things like icons. You can see I've used here a home icon. So anywhere you can just click on that and it takes you back to the menu page. And there's a whole range of icons, and with each of those, and I'm not going to linger too much on those, you know, there's obviously some kind of feedback function there. With each of those icons, you just drop the icon in, and then here, and this is true in everything, every object in here has got an on select, which basically means when you click it, what do you want me to do? So when I click that, I want to navigate to the menu screen. I want to do it with a nice little fade rather than snapping across, which looks like that. Nice, isn't it? It is nicely executed. Now, let's have a quick walk through what that experience looks like for when you're running the application. So I can run from here. The permissions, you'll remember that I told it. Different people have different permissions. I have approval and I have admin, but I don't have these ones, so it just disables them. I could have said make it invisible. I could have said you know, change color, change, you know, whatever. I could do all sorts of things, but all I've done is just disable it for the ones that I can't do. If I go to the my approvals, it's going to give me the list here. Now, here's an immediate challenge that I discovered in putting this together. You can't, from PowerApps, interrupt an approval that has been started in Flow or in PowerAutomate. So that one that I just started, it says it's with me and it says it's pending, but I can't approve it from here. I still have to go to my email to do that. So this panel might be useful to remind me of all the things that I've got to do. I don't think, I'm always open to being proved wrong on these things, but I don't think I can get in and actually do the approval from here. But as we saw, I can view the original. I haven't built an admin page, so we'll ignore that one. If I were to go to the all invoices, again, this is using the same data set. So I can say, well, here's all the invoices for Google. Switch, you can see, so that's 450 and it's jig and it's not submitted. Or for 275, I can switch vendors and so on. And what I can do is I can submit the to the PowerAutomate environment. So this here is how we do that. Again, it starts to get quite complicated, but if we look at it in PowerAutomate, I'm aware there's a lot going on in this, which is that's here. Now, if you were here on Tuesday, you'll have seen this process. I haven't really changed the process in any significant way, except before it was a trigger from SharePoint. Now it's a trigger from PowerApps. So all I've done is I've said I'm going to call this from PowerApps. There's nothing more to add there, but here it says which file do I want, and then when I configure, which one was on? Sorry, that one. When I configure PowerApps, I have to then say again in that invoices table, it's to use the ID of the selected row to fire that process. So here we have one for £12,000, which has got to go to Simon Moore, and I can submit that from there. Now, remember what I was saying earlier about the development environment doesn't, by default, doesn't update data. You can force that, but I haven't. But if I just refresh the data now, we will hopefully see that the £12,000 one is with Simon Moore and is now pending. So we've triggered the same flow, but it's from a nice experience rather than it all being in SharePoint and I've got to click here and do that little drop down and what have you. We're just presenting it in a more user-friendly way. There is obviously a lot more here. You can do a great deal. That whole process could be developed out, could be connected to other systems. You could draw in information from spreadsheets, from SQL databases, and so on. You can brand in any particular way you want. I had one customer who actually wanted to be able to configure the colors themselves, and you can do that. It's a bit of a pain, but you can do it. So you give them like an admin panel and say, well, put the colors you want here, and then that uses that to drive the colors of everything else. Within reason, the sky's your limit. You can put in charts. So I haven't used charts a great deal, I'll confess, but you can certainly put let's put a chart in here. Charts, column chart. A lot of the things, as has happened here, a lot of things will come with a kind of default data set to show you what they're going to look like. You then have to do quite a bit of configuration with the charts, which I don't have time to do here, but you can do a kind of a chunk of the configuration to get it to show what you want. So there you go, it's starting to grid style. You can do all sorts of bits and pieces. I could choose to filter invoices by a given vendor or what have you. There's a lot to play with, is what I'm leading you towards. Different types of pie charts, and you can even import Power BI. If you're using Power BI for any of your metrics, you can take what they call a tile, a single chart or a single visualization out of Power BI and present it in your Power App. And then over here, all premium, but there is some AI as well. So form processor, so you can start to build AI logic around form submissions, object detector, which uses the camera in your device, and also text recognizer, which uses the camera in your device, takes some text and it will analyze it and what have you. And the business card reader, I think it's a bit odd. Not many people have business cards these days, but as a business card reader, these are, as you can see, premiums. So you get to the point where you've developed your app, you've finished, you think, yes, this is great. You don't need to get to the point where it's super great, because the way it works is publication and sharing at kind of key points along the development. So all I need to do here, in fact, is hit save. Now at that save, it's saved in the development, hasn't published it to the users. So the users are not going to see anything different, but if I choose to go publish, that will now become available to every user. And as I say, that experience is either they're going on the web, which means logging onto the portal, logging onto the Office 365 portal, selecting PowerApps, and they can come through to it here, or through the Windows client, or through the mobile clients. The Windows client has a nice little feature that once you've published the app, you can actually mount each app individually in the start menu. You don't need to kind of start PowerApps, then go looking for the app. You can mount each one individually in the start menu. And any second now, this is going to load up that app, he said confidently. So that's the base client. It's opening the app, and then it's coming through to here. And because it's me that's logged on, you'll see I've got approvals, I've got admin, I haven't got access to the other two because it's identified that it's me that's logged on. And it's taken that log on from Windows. So I'm not having to log on separately to this. I can make it full screen. I can work in it like this. I can click around, do what I need to do. That view original is going to send me back to the browser, and so on. It didn't work. There's a reason why it didn't work. It's because it's the dummy tenant, and of course in Windows I'm logged in with my my work account. So, and there it is presented. Now, I don't claim this is the most fantastic app that has ever been developed in the history of the world. It most certainly isn't. And up at the top of this webinar, I did say this is a discussion of possibilities rather than a masterclass or a training session. But hopefully there's enough there that's made you think, I wonder if, we've got this bit of data that we're using, and it's a bit clunky, and we could do something better with it. That's the conversation that I'd like you to be having, and have a think about your business processes. Look for things which are clearly defined, not huge processes, start and end. Don't try and take on your whole supply chain, your whole business management function. Just processes with a clear start and end, with a fairly limited data set that are easy to control and easy to define, but are clunky. PowerApps is the way to solve those problems, in my opinion. That's it. I'm done, Jig.
Wow. Well, I was playing around with PowerApps actually, and looking at some of the templates, and thought, the
templates. Yes.
Oh right. Well, I was sort of looking at one of them and thinking, as a marketing head, you could create your own Power App that can display your products, put it on an iPad and take it to your client. And instead of going to the website, you can go, look, have a look on here. There's some videos and whatnot, and some images and whatnot, and show the, just do it in a different way. So you're not looking at it in a website sort of format. So there are different, that was just one of the templates I saw that was already pre-built from Microsoft.
Yeah, I'll just load up the screen for that. I'm trying anyway. 1 second.
Let me.
Yeah, so this is, so to get to that, create, start from template. As you saw, there's a couple of different ways into the creation screen, but you can see here the start from template, all the various things. You've got a mobile, help desk, service desk management, site inspections, asset, PDF readers, organization browsers. Because PowerApps is based on and connected to Active Directory, so all of that information about people in your business, I sort of touched on it with that user control, but you can use the Office 365 users to go and interrogate about anybody in the business. So tell me, I could say, well, I've selected one person from a drop-down manager, but I want to know who their manager is. I've seen that done. Interestingly, I've seen an example of that in a what would you call it, a whistleblower app.
Oh,
essentially, I think this person is doing something inappropriate. Tell me through the AD chain who the appropriate director is to report that to, which is an interesting way of using the tool. So you can see all of this. That's in the Office world. Onboarding tasks, meeting capture. The meeting capture app is really cool. Connects to Planner and OneNote and Exchange. So it pulls together and says, right, because it's this time, you're probably in this meeting. Is that right? Yes. Start meeting. Start taking minutes in OneNote. Publish tasks out to Planner to get people to do things, and agree the time of the next meeting. And it's all in that one screen that you can see there. So I'm a big fan of that. Leave request. There are some permissions issues with the leave request one. We've had fun and games trying to make that one work. There are Company Pulse is another one. We do something similar internally with what's it called, Tiny Pulse.
yes.
Just about getting feedback from your staff. But actually, there's a free one here that Company Pulse for basically gathering surveys and feedbacks and what have you. So go have a look. Create, start from template, or just Google or Bing. They probably want you to Bing it, but Google the PowerApps templates. There's also a massive community of builders. So if there isn't a template here, there might be a company that have already developed it, and some of them are giving it away for free. Most of them are not. For people have to make a living, but it's always worth looking to see whether somebody else has had the idea and has already developed. They're not going to be bang on what you want, but they might be 80% of the way there, and that saves you 80% of your work.
Well, yeah, and then all you've got to do after that is tweak it, make it work to what you need to do. So actually, there's huge amounts of possibilities with PowerApps, really. It's whatever you think you want to try and do, you give it a bash. I mean, literally in this webinar, I was mucking about and putting some pages together. Not very well done, but this is me learning at the same time. So it is there. Okay. And Jeremy's asked a question. Are the templates easier to make than an app from scratch?
I mean, well, yes. You can get going quicker.
You'll have to work out what they were aiming to do first.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they don't cost anything, right? So the most it's going to cost you is some time. Assuming you've got your PowerApps license in place, the most it's going to cost you is some time. You see here, so I'm trying to start that office planning one. It's going to ask me, okay, I need all these permissions. Is that okay? Yes. And then it takes a bit of thinking, joins all the bits together, and it says, right, there you go. So if I would say if the templates are 80–90% of what you're trying to achieve, then yes, it probably is easier to start there. The only thing is, a lot of these templates, if we look on this one, you'll see there's no data field, so a lot of them are a bit locked down because it's a template. They've taken away some of the you can't connect it to other data sets and all that sort of stuff. So it depends, is what I would say. I know that's not a great answer, Jeremy, but the I would definitely give it a go, because the only thing that it's going to cost you is time.
Yeah,
If
plus
it's going to answer most of your problems straight away, then do that.
yeah, and also you can use it as a guide if you feel you need to start from scratch. Here's something that's started off, and it's going to help to guide you to build your own one from scratch. So you can use it.
That's a really good point, actually, Jig. And when I started, I did a lot of that. Another thing that's worth considering is that up in the new screen, there's a bunch of templated stuff that you can use. So even if you say, I want all of my own process stuff, I want to develop myself, but I want to be able to send an email from it, I want to be able to book a meeting from it, or I want to view my calendar from it. There are kind of screens within that. So, whoops, I'll demonstrate that by coming to the invoice approval one, which is a bit of a mess now. So if I delete that screen and that one, because they are a mess. But if I said, well, okay, but I want to send an email out of that, that's all templated there and ready to go. And again, I can configure it if I want. And the nice thing, to your point, Jig, about using templates is that you can still get into all of the formulas and you can see how they've done it.
Yeah, you can.
And I mean, frankly, plagiarize mercilessly for the bits that you like. So yeah, I definitely would be looking around the templates.
Oh yeah, it's just the perfect way. If you're new to PowerApps as well, and you're just getting into it, it's the best way to learn. You can see what somebody else has done, work out how that's worked, try it out yourself. If it breaks, it breaks. If it works,
yeah. And there is a rollback actually on that. So we didn't get into any of the more sophisticated stuff, and I can't quite remember where to find it. But there is a you can roll back as well if you really mess something up. You can just go, okay, just take me back to the last one that worked. So it's really hard to do any major damage with PowerApps.
That's the main thing. If you can't damage anything, you know.
Well, not to the environment. You could possibly damage your processes if you built a stupid process, but I can't help you with that.
No. Oh well, I think it's brilliant. I think there's so many possibilities, and that's the fun part of it all. It's working out what you want. It's not just within your business. It's how can you use it for outside your business. How can you use it as a marketing tool? Especially, I don't know if anyone had gone to any of these sort of trade shows, whatever, and they've always got their tablets out. They're always linking you up to the website and going, look at this, and then they've got the forms. You could have created that in PowerApps. So your tablet is there, all branded up. It looks like you've got your own app there designed. You can show the products, get them to fill in the forms, capture their data, store it in your SharePoint. Bing bang bosh, you've got something that looks amazing and does functions for you and does everything you need, really. So I think I'm thinking marketing again. So I think it's brilliant. Anything more to add, Nick?
No, that's it. I'm done. Thank you.
Well, I'd say thank you.
3 minutes past 4, so
yeah. I'd like to say thank you to everybody for joining us. If you like to contact us, our contact details are on the screen. We're always here to help. Please connect with us on LinkedIn, email us if you need any support. We're there. And I'm going to say thank you for joining us again. I hope you have a good night. See you later.